Hey, good to see you again. Welcome to this video called How to Risk Your Tournament Life. Let me ask you a question. What's the riskiest thing you've ever done? The riskiest thing you've ever done? Mine is that when I was 11 years old, I back-chatted to the school bully. Now, when I say school bully, he was 16 years old and he was about 8'6". I don't know what happened to this kid. It's probably a thyroid problem or something. For some reason he didn't like me. He used to make comments on me or whatever. And I decided to give him a mouthful back one time. I've never run so fast in my life, if I'm honest. And it's a miracle I'm here talking to you today. The fear and terror of that moment lives long in my psyche. It was fun though. And I did get away with it more or less. Just had to dodge him for the next 4 weeks. What is the riskiest thing you ever done? I would bet that you haven't done too much that's risky. I haven't done too much that's risky, and there's a very good reason for that. We hate risk, right? Humans conquered the planet by managing their risks because, when you take risks, you're exposing yourself to danger and bad things. I actually don't believe there's any such thing as a real risk taker because I think people that are seen as risk takers do things that don't feel like risk to them, right? Because if they felt that danger and foreboding, they wouldn't do it. So how does this all relate to poker? Well, we're talking about your tournament life. And a lot of what I'm going to talk about is psychological and getting past some psychological barriers. So this is really kind of head trip stuff, although it does have some mechanical outputs in terms of your poker decisions. But what I wanted to kind of get into first was the fact that if you feel like you're taking risks, you've got no chance of taking that action, right? If you feel like you are risking your tournament life, you won't do it. Because why would you want to gamble about something with a negative impact? So what I'm going to do is kind of try to get your poker programming to understand that it's not about taking risks, it's about making the right decisions and following through on them. Because if you can get your brain to understand that, then you can become a much better no-limit hold'em player and you won't have this feeling of kind of pressure and nerves and foreboding and, oh God, what if I bust? And you'll have a much more complete set of moves as a poker player, because that's what you want, right? You want to be able to make big bluffs for your tournament life, huge cool downs when someone's put the pressure on, but it's the right thing to call, all of that good stuff. But you won't be able to do it if you're worried about busting the tournament. So that's what we're going to talk about today. Now, I have just given you a short answer to this question, how do you risk your tournament life? The answer is you just make good decisions and you don't worry about it. That is actually the answer. But like I said, this is more psychological than anything. So let's break down what you actually have to do. Step number 1 of our 4 is going to be to accept the nature of no limit hold'em. So accept with open arms no limit hold'em. And what that means is your entire stack is in play all of the time. Your stack is in play. Now that might sound a bit obvious, right? Obviously your stack is in play, their chips are on the table, whatever. But most poker players, and especially in tournaments where when you bust, you're out the door, right? Most poker players don't play like all their stacks in play. The more their chips diminish, or the bigger the decision for the bigger portion of their stack, the more they're going to act like they need to hold on to those chips because we have a very strong survival instinct. Now, the problem with that is that it makes us very easy to exploit by better players. It means that we're going to miss out on a ton of opportunities and basically you're sort of handcuffing yourself. So the first way we get over that is by putting our stack playing as if our stack is in play, and we need to get our heads to understand that that's a good thing to do. So you have to accept the nature of no limit hold'em, right? The nature of no limit hold'em is that you can go broke. There is no limit on what is at risk as long as it's in front of you in any one hand, whether that's the first hand in the tournament or the last hand in the tournament, it doesn't matter. You also need to condition yourself to understand you are going to bust almost every poker tournament you play, right? Sometimes you're going to bust as one of the first people to go out. Sometimes you're going to bust as the next to last player to go out. You're going to finish second. But most of the time you are going to bust. There's nothing magical about busting a tournament. We all do it, right? More than that, even if you're a winning tournament player, you're going to bust, an average of 85% of the tournaments you enter with no prize because they only pay 15%, 12%, 10% or whatever it is of the field. So most of the time you're in a tournament, you're going to bust. So really, when you think through logically, actually not in a tournament, Busting is a very, very natural part of being in a tournament. You should have no fear of it whatsoever. Now, your tournament life does have some value, and this value increases as you get deeper in the tournament and actually get into the money. But you can't play as if that's the case, because it just means that you end up playing far too tight, far too cautiously, far too passively, because you're worried about this thing that is a natural consequence of playing the game anyway. So I'd recommend you find some form of words that I've just gone through that speaks to you, and write it out in front of you, or put it on your phone or on your screen or whatever, if you have a problem with busting tournaments and you're fearful of doing it. I know you're probably watching this thinking, yeah, the problem I have, Nick, is I bust tournaments and I hate it, I want to win them all. That's fine. I'm talking about, do you have a fear of doing it that stops you making big decisions at the poker table? So the first thing is to understand that all the chips are in play, get your brain to understand that it's a part of the game, and that you're not doing the right thing if you don't make these big moves when the occasion calls for it. If you have hesitancy about making the right decision at a poker table, you can't ever win. So you've got to get past this. So I wish you all the best. Good luck with it. It's just about conditioning yourself and accepting that's what happens and working on your psychological side of things. All right, we're going to think hand by hand. Not big picture. I've got a big head. Just about get away with that one. So we're going to think hand by hand, not big picture. One of the mistakes players make in MTT tournaments is that they spend a lot of time worrying about the average stack, where they are in the standings, how many players are left, all of that stuff. They worry about when they're falling behind the average stack. They get all excited when they've got a big stack. That's all fine, but it can't affect your poker decisions. And players spend much too much time thinking about the big picture of tournaments and not the actual now, the present, what they're actually doing. Now, the reason that that's relevant is that the more you can think about your decisions on a hand-by-hand basis and just ask yourself, what's the right decision with this hand on this street against this opponent in this pot, the better you're going to do. Because anytime your brain thinks something is a big deal, like we just said, a big risk or any kind of big deal, it doesn't do as well because it starts to panic, it starts to get too much adrenaline, it starts to kind of shut down a bit. So we want to just focus on the hand that we're playing. We want to remember we can only ever win chips from the 8 or 9 players around the table. We can't win chips from the whole tournament. That just happens over time. And in this hand, we can only win chips from 1 or 2 or however many players are in this particular hand. So it's vital that you're bringing yourself into the now and just think hand by hand. That will make this process I talked about in step 1 of, just making good poker decisions and not worrying about whether that involves all of your chips or some of your chips. That will make it much easier because you'll get much more locked into the decisions you're making right now. Okay, number 3 is back your judgment. Back your judgment. Again, this is really psychological as opposed to a playing tip, but it's incredibly important. If you talk to any professional player or really, really strong player, they won't even recognize this as a problem because they've got themselves to the point where they're just trying to make the best action to win, right? They're just trying to make the best action to win. Now, for us more normal people, we have an obstacle to overcome, which is that we might think it's right to do something, but we're going to worry more about the consequences. This all obviously works together, but backing your judgment in the moment is a separate kind of super tactical piece because it's one thing to kind of focus on the now and hand by hand, think all this good stuff, right? You then get in a hand and somebody puts a massive bet on the table and you have to decide whether you're going to call for your tournament life. Well, suddenly you're going to be overwhelmed by the situation. It's a very natural reaction and it's a much easier course of action to just fold, right? By the way, sometimes it's right to fold. I'm not saying that you should always call. You understand the point I'm making. We're going to take the easy option, the path of least resistance, just the natural thing to do. So you need to get over that by committing to backing your judgment. So what I mean by that is every single hand you go through, you're going to go through an analytical process where you think about the hand as best you can, as clearly as you can, locked in on that hand, not worrying about anything else. And then when you've thought about your decision, you'll come to your conclusion, you're just going to do it. You're not going to think, oh, this is for my tournament. Oh, this is a big decision. What happens if I bust? We're only 15 off the money, whatever it is. Don't worry about that stuff. Make the good decision. Make the good poker decision. Commit to always backing your judgment at the table. And a lot of these ideas like risking my tournament life, or, you know, am I going to go out here, or am I going to mess this up? They will disappear because you're just thinking about the hand. The more you can think about the actual decision you've made and focus on that hand by hand, the better a poker player you're going to be. And committing to backing your judgment is a good kind of shortcut to doing that. And don't be discouraged, right? Sometimes you'll back your judgment, it will be the wrong decision. That's just poker. Every single poker player on the planet has to deal with that. Doesn't matter how good or bad they are. Don't worry about that. Just keep backing your judgment and results will improve, I promise, on that one. And then finally, you're going to work on your game away from the table. Now, this may seem unconnected, but I'll get there, don't worry. Work off table. And I mean specifically on these big decisions in tournaments. One of the reasons that you feel uncomfortable with playing for your tournament life, or making huge bluffs or huge call downs or big decisions in tournaments, is that you just haven't experienced it enough and you haven't thought about it analytically enough. Again, very, very normal. When you play a tournament, you're only going to get 1 or 2 or 3 of these decisions each tournament. So even if you play 50 tournaments, you're still not going to have thousands and thousands of times where you've made like one of these big calls or big bluffs or whatever it is, or risked your tournament life in this way. So the way that you can shortcut that is actually work on these spots and these hands off the table. So when you have, you play a tournament, or you play a tournament session online or whatever it is, make a note of the big hands that you play, the big decisions you had to make, and make sure whatever you do between finishing that session and playing another session, you go through those big pots and you really think about those hands and think about them logically. Perhaps analyze them as if someone else played them, so you can get away from your subjective emotion about your decisions. And just, this is all basically a process to condition your brain to do what's right, to make the right play, whether it involves your tournament life or not. All right, I really hope that helps. I hope that's de-risked the idea of making those big moves. It's a process. The more you go through it, the better you'll get at it. I hope this has helped, and if it has, I'd love to hear from you. Leave me a comment underneath the video, let me know what you thought. If you've got any questions, and I know tournament life can be sometimes a controversial area, so if there's anything you're not sure about, or if you've got anything you want me to add further stuff on, then do ask me in the comments. I will jump in there over the next few days and get back to you on stuff you are unclear about. All right, thank you for watching. Give this a like on Facebook and a share, and share it on other social media so we can get the word out to other poker players who we like. And I will talk to you again in another one of these videos very, very soon.